Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. As you probably know, over the weekend, horrible tornadoes caused massive carnage and damage across 5 states, and particularly in Kentucky. The fatalities are still climbing. Our prayers are with every single person affected in this path of this destruction. And I'll have on my Substack newsletter more ways that you can help and either volunteer or donate. Now, in a normal world in which every last thing would not be politicized, we would just do what Americans would do, right? We would mourn with people who mourn, and we would come together and we'd get busy rebuilding. And that's what Americans do. Historically, tragedies like tornadoes and terrorist attacks or man-made disasters or natural, these were moments of American cohesion. We came together, we laid aside political differences, but it doesn't seem to happen anymore. This Marxist revolution that's been taking place in the United States, I mean, they has to have objectives to achieve. So every event, whether it's a school shooting or a riot, holidays even, to every last tragedy and disaster has to be used and construed to further march forward for the left. So when an unusually powerful tornado strikes, several actually, in mid-December and wreaks havoc, immediate assertions are made and correlations are drawn, even in the face of previous historical precedent, because this has happened before, sadly. They say this is a result of global warming, yet there's no science presented at all whatsoever when this is said. No one explains exactly how they know this, and there's never a debate between the correlation between man-made global warming and violent weather either. This is the consensus scientific opinion, even though there's no actual consensus in the scientific community, but you can't deviate from it. And increasingly, as sure as nature will unleash fury periodically in tragic ways, I mean, we've seen this since the beginning of time, so too do institutional leaders rush to declare that everything from COVID to food shortages to heart attacks, earthquakes, hurricanes, everything, tornadoes, are all the result of man-made global warming. And we can expect more bad weather, they tell us, over and over again. Now, the tragedy that took place across several states, and as we were talking about just a moment ago, Kentucky, which seems hardest hit, is a perfect example. Here's what President Biden had to say about all of this, the tragedy and the connection to man-made global warming. Watch.
All that I know is that the intensity of the weather across the board has some impact as a consequence of the warming of the planet and the climate change. The specific impact on these specific storms, I can't say at this point. I'm going to be asking the EPA and others to take a look at that. But the fact is that we all know everything is more intense when the climate is warming. Everything. And obviously it has some impact here, but I can't give you a quantitative read on that.
This is one of the most shameful and despicable moments of this man's presidency, and I find it disgusting. Sitting here suggesting, as people are trying to find their loved ones, that man-made global warming is connected to this. He stopped short of saying that this exact storm was caused by it, but FEMA's director was much bolder in claiming that there's a direct correlation between the tornadoes that took place across the country and, well, in certain parts of the country, particularly Kentucky, and global warming. Watch.
This is going to be our new normal, and the effects that we're seeing from climate change are the crisis of our generation. We're taking a lot of efforts at FEMA to work with communities to help reduce the impacts that we're seeing from these severe weather events and help to develop system-wide projects that can help protect communities.
So FEMA's director says this is the new normal. She provides zero data. No science. No science, that's the new normal. And you have to believe in that, the absence of science, apparently. But since the FEMA director didn't provide any science or data, I will. I'm not a climatologist or a meteorologist. By the way, you don't have to be either of those things to read and appreciate fact. I hate that whole appeal to authority that the left tries to use to shut people up. I'm a person, though, with access to the internet, and it takes like 3 seconds to dig up a few facts that might cause one to pause before making such a pronouncement and tying a tragic event to a political agenda. So first off, with the tornado that took place in Kentucky, it appears to be an F5. That is the most powerful kind. They're rated on a scale between 1 and 5. 1's the most, that is the least powerful, 5 is the most. F5s, those are history making, and they're violent, horribly so. But also the nature of this tornado was incredibly unique because it appears to have been on the ground for like 200 plus miles. There are still some details that are emerging. There were reports of other tornadoes, but an F5 that travels 200 plus miles in December on its face, that seems really unusual. But as it turns out, it's not unprecedented. In fact, December is no stranger to F5 tornadoes. On December 18th, in 1957, the town of Sunfield, Illinois, was destroyed by an F5. And was that event unprecedented? Historically, tornado outbreaks have occurred on nearly every day of the year. If the conditions are right, any day can produce devastating tornadoes. I've been in tornadoes. I've seen it. I've seen them in December, and I grew up in Tornado Alley. The United States just happens to have some of the most tornadic events of any place in the world. It's part of life for us. We know that long-track tornadoes have occurred in the past with path lengths exceeding 100 miles, so the length of this tornado being on the ground for possibly 200 miles, if that turns out to be true, and we're still finding out all the details of this, it would not be unprecedented. None less tragic, but not unprecedented. Now, there's also this inconvenient truth. If global warming, man-made global warming, is causing greater frequency of violent tornadoes, why are we having fewer of those violent tornadoes? The fact is that the U.S. hasn't seen an F5 since 2013. Not one F5 until this weekend in Kentucky. In 9 years. So this is the longest streak without an F5 tornado since we began recording the data in the 50s. And it's odd that the president and FEMA's director never mention this in these discussions or statements ever. So if global warming is getting worse, why did we just have the longest streak ever without an F5 tornado in history? And there's more. This year, we're running below the average of 1,368 tornadoes a year, with 1,230 preliminary tornadoes up until through Saturday. So we've had fewer tornadoes this year of any kind than usual. Why would they say that this event then is related to global warming? Why not actually produce precedent and compare it to that so that you're not freaking people out? I mean, is it possible that we're getting fewer tornadoes and less violent ones then to global warming? Can we even ask that question? According to John T. Allen, an associate professor of meteorology at Central Michigan University, it's not possible to make a correlation between global warming and the tornado that impacted parts of the country. The issue needs to be studied far more. He wrote this in an opinion piece printed today, saying, quote, "Given the historical precedent, it would be misleading to definitively state a relationship to climate change without further assessment," end quote. So why would FEMA's administrator, Deanne Criswell, say that there's a correlation to global warming after noting that December tornadoes are not that unusual? She said, quote, "At this magnitude, I don't think we've ever seen one this late in the year. The effects we are seeing of climate change are the crisis of our generation," end quote. Actually, if Ms. Criswell cared to Google it, she'd know that an F5 had wiped out a town, as I said, in Illinois even later in December, 5 days from now, on December 18th. So why wouldn't an administrator of FEMA just take out her phone and Google it? Like, why does our legacy press and our health disaster agencies rush to connect everything to politics? And it's politics because there's no consensus in the scientific community. Just like I'm not going to be bullied about pronouns, I'm not going to be bullied about what is theory and what is fact. A clue to that answer may lie, though, inside of Democrat Swalwell's tweet about the tragedy in Kentucky. Swalwell, who is fond of sleeping with Chinese spies and passing gas on live television, tweeted this, quote, "We should all do what we can to help our Kentucky neighbors. God be with them. They are hurting. But do not for 1 second forget that Rand Paul has voted against helping most Americans most times they're in need," end quote. So that tweet from the corrupt and undignified and just absolutely disgusting meat sack that is Congressman Swalwell was in response to Rand Paul expressing sympathy. I mean, can you people who get off on politicizing everything, can you just quell your fetishes for 5 seconds? That would be wonderful. And going after somebody for a tweet and about the victims of a tornado in his state in Kentucky, just be a decent human being and extend condolences. But no, it's demonstrative of how Democrats think every tragedy can and should be leveraged for political ends, including political hate. In this case, Swalwell can leverage the tragic tornado to attack Rand Paul. And Rand Paul's crime is that he doesn't agree with the Democrats that the government is the answer to all of our problems. In fact, Rand Paul believes that government is often the cause of our problems, like pandemics that start in U.S. government-funded labs in commie countries. So Swalwell, rather than take on Paul's arguments, goes for just a tragedy and tries to politicize it. So why would Swalwell do it? Because he's a moron. I don't really have anything nice to say. Did you expect me to say something nice about this man? I have nothing. Democrats want to politicize everything, including the weather. So to help understand why I want to understand why they intend, why constantly politicize tragedy. And especially going after the weather like this, it's because Democrats want to control you. It's no different than the pandemic. See, if I can scare you, maybe I can talk you into giving up your rights and freedoms to stop being scared. Emergencies are the perfect pretext for everything the left wants to do. We'll all die unless you do X, Y, and Z. They have zero evidence that your lives will be saved by doing X, Y, and Z, just like they have zero evidence of data that caused global warming with the tornadoes in Kentucky or any particular weather event. But what they do have is institutional control of our federal agencies, health agencies, disaster agencies like FEMA. So get ready to be told daily that everything from pandemics to stress to heart attacks, tornadoes, etc., are all caused by global warming, that it's going to be the end of us all. So why would they tell you that? To scare you and create a pretext for massive changes. That's just what they've always ever done. Would you have ever imagined that the government would coerce a majority of people into taking an injection with no long-term studies? Not like one injection, but 3 and maybe 4 or maybe 5, maybe 6 with no end in sight. Would you have imagined that big tech folding to government pressure would censor and it is because it's on behalf of a government, censor dissent about universal vaccination programs that have no end, that increasingly must be adhered to in order to do basic things in life, like go out to dinner, like in Germany or Austria? How did that happen? Fear. It turns out scaring you is a great way to get you to give up control. Marxist Democrats will use fear so they can get authority from you. And then they'll promise to make your problems go away. They'll allay your anxieties. No more pandemic or hurricanes or inequity or tornadoes even. Of course, that's not science. It's actually propaganda that flies in the face of science. That's the new normal. It's empty promises made by cynical politicians who promise that they can make the pain go away. But as Biden has just proved, we've had more fatalities, by the way, under his watch from COVID than we had from the previous administration. They can never follow through on their promises. Mother Nature is hard to predict. Right? That's just the way it is. Mother Nature is sometimes antithetical to how we would like to live life. And tragedy and inequity and yes, tornadoes are a part of living with nature. We can't control Mother Nature any more than we can control our own nature. Democrats like Swalwell demonstrate this, right? I mean, they absolutely do. Like so many other Democrats seem to believe that they can control the weather. So our meteorologists struggle to forecast the weather accurately 5 days out, yet they claim to know what the weather is going to be 100 years from now. I mean, economies are complex, weather is complex, and trying to understand all of it is a fool's errand. So some people step back, they should step back with some humility and recognize the limits of our own power over complex systems. It requires wisdom, something Marxists don't seem to possess. And yet the lesson from Kentucky is that nature cannot be controlled and that we are always vulnerable. Cutting back on greenhouse gases is not going to stop hurricanes or tornadoes, but trying to commandeer the world's biggest economy under the pretext that we can while ceding it all to China that doesn't have any environmental regulations, that's not going to do anything. Finally, the politicization of any tragedy is wrong. The first instinct must not only be to help, but also not to blame. So the guy who didn't think of politics when the tornado struck, I love this. He just thought about helping. This man thought about helping, so he packed a truck full of food and brought his barbecue and went out to help. Watch.
I know they don't have no electricity, so that means they don't have no no restaurants or no running water, so I just figured I'd do what I can do. Show up with some food and some water.
I just figured I'd do what I could do. Everybody has a value. Everybody has something to offer, and he showed up to offer what he could. Do what I do. Tragedy should bring people together, not tear people apart. So ask yourself, who's politicizing this? All the tragedies. Who's politicizing this and discouraging people from getting together? And then ask yourself why. Coming up, the DOJ has been weaponized against conservatives yet again. We'll tell you what's going on in my state of Texas and discuss it with Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Straight ahead, stay here. Thanks to Biden's economic policies, job numbers have been abysmal and inflation skyrocketing. Instead of following the former president's pro-business agenda that had the economy booming, Biden wants to tax corporations and pass trillion-dollar bills we can't pay for. You should be proactive and take steps to protect your wealth and your retirement by investing in gold and precious metals, and Legacy Precious Metals can help. Washington prints money to pay for their bills, but that just devalues your dollar. Gold offers a hedge against inflation. As the dollar gets weaker, gold gets stronger. The folks at Legacy Precious Metals are the gold standard when it comes to investing in precious metals, and they have a team of experts who can counsel you on the best options for you and your family. Don't leave your retirement to chance. Call Legacy Precious Metals at 866-580-2088 or visit them online to download their free investor's guide full of useful info at legacypminvestments.com.
The complaint we filed today alleges that Texas has violated Section 2 by creating redistricting plans that deny or abridge the rights of Latino and Black voters to vote on account of their race, color, or membership in a language minority group.
That was United States Attorney General and failed to get on the Supreme Court candidate Merrick Garland last week, announcing a lawsuit. Another one, I'm sure he loves Texas, against the Republic of Texas over its new redistricting maps, alleging racism because, of course. So we're going to break this down. And so to do so, we invited Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton on the program. He joins us now. Sir, as always, so good to see you. And thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to have you explain this to people because I was looking at some of the language that Merrick Garland had used in his remarks. He said that these were talking about how the districts were drawn. He said they were discriminatively drawn, et cetera, et cetera. So and that it was drawn with discriminatory intent was the phrase. And then the process was also criticized. So the way that he alleges it, it's that essentially Texas sat down and decided, how can we best disenfranchise minorities? Let's draw things this way. That's obviously not what happened. So break this down for us.
Well, so it's a good question. First of all, how does he know the intent of the legislature? There are 181 members of the legislature. How he knows their intent is a whole nother question. So I don't think any of us know all of their intent. What we do know about redistricting is it's a political process, and it's not an easy process because they have to decide lines among the legislators who are there. It's those who have been elected by the people that should draw those lines, not the Biden administration, who would like to obviously make this a Democratic state.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And the way that they and I do find it interesting that they're very obsessed with voting district borders, not so much with the southern border or allowing Texas to do anything with the southern border, but they're very concerned about these borders for these voting districts. And they say that it's about changing and apparently diminishing, they said, diminishing opportunities for Latino and Black voters in Texas to elect their preferred representatives. I don't know if Merrick Garland, General, has paid attention to any of this, what's happening, especially with some of these, I can't really say Democrat because they're really previously or formerly Democrat or more purple or moderate now. But there are a lot of Democrat areas down by the border that went for Trump last election, were even leaning towards him in 2016, that are predominantly, I would say, leaning more Republican now than they ever have been. So what does he say to that? Because he's the one who sounds out of touch here.
Well, and you'll notice he's not suing any Democratic states, nor would I expect that he would. He's probably pleased with how they drew their lines because they favor Democrats. This is all about politics for him. It's all about trying to take a state that if they can take over, if they can win, they will be successful in making this a one-party country. And you're right about the border. Yeah. It is turned more Republican because the people on the border, whether they've been Republican or Democrats in the past, none of them like what's going on down there. They think the administration is ignoring their pleas for help, which they are. They're not just ignoring it, but they're actually inviting the problem in, and they know there's a crime problem, a drug problem, and that there's a COVID problem, and that those problems have been invited in by the Biden administration.
You make a really good point as to whether or not Merrick Garland would ever go after some of these blue states, because I kind of wonder if Merrick Garland has ever met Illinois. When I look at the way that Illinois' districts are laid out and drawn, it's kind of insane, especially when you compare it to their complaint over what's being proposed by the Texas state legislature. Sir, what are you hearing from Republicans and Democrats in Texas? Because I've been hearing more from Merrick Garland than I've really heard from a lot of Democrats here in Texas.
Well, there's no doubt that Democrats in Texas would like to change the lines too, because they want a different Texas than what has been elected, and this is an attempt to do that. So we've been sued by Democrats. And it's not just the Department of Justice; it's other Democrats in the state of Texas. But it's clear to me this is very political. And as I said, I don't expect Merrick Garland to go after any Democratic states for the crazy lines that you talked about in Illinois or any other state. Apparently, that's okay as long as they draw it the right way for their party.
How is this going to end up, do you think? I mean, I realize I'm asking, this is kind of conjecture a little bit here, or gazing into the crystal ball. I know you're going to fight it on behalf of Texas, but how do you see this ending up? Because it kind of floors me that Garland's getting involved in this.
Well, so I'm not in some ways surprised, because this happened 10 years ago. Obama's administration, Eric Holder, they sued us. It took 8.5 years. We were successful. It just takes a lot of time and effort, and it's a very long process. I think this will go quicker. I think we've got a better 3-judge panel than we had in the past, at least on the federal side. We also have a state lawsuit, and I think we've got a good panel there as well. So I expected this. It really is deja vu all over again, and it's because the Democratic administrations in power typically want to turn our state. We're the chief target of any Democratic administration to change how the voters are putting this together.
How much of this, last question for you, how much of this is just seems like retribution for Texas not making permanent a lot of these pandemic protocols as it related to, you know, the 24-hour voting, but the mail-in voting and then the voting drop box? Do you think that some part of that's motivated by that? This is motivating this move?
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind that they have ill will towards Texas. We've sued them over election stuff. We've sued them over the border. We've sued them over the vaccine mandates. We've got, I think it's 22 or 23 lawsuits with the federal government right now, just since Biden was elected. So there's no doubt that we're a target. They've tried to take away our Medicaid money. They've tried to take away other things. We're definitely being punished for our conservative views and for a successful state that has low taxes and open and free choices for people when they move here.
There you go. Well, we're going to watch and see how that. Hopefully, it won't take eight or so years. Hopefully, it won't take that long. But good heavens, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, sir, always good to see you. Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So coming up, as the G virus, I'm not calling it COVID anymore, as the G virus pandemic goes on, new treatments continue to emerge. It's a good thing, right? Well, not really to the tyrants in charge that would like to have their way with these mandates. Constitutional attorney Jonathan Emord joins us next to discuss. You have homeowners insurance for a good reason, because without it, a fire, flood, or burglary could destroy you financially. But there's another major crime that your homeowner's policy doesn't cover, and that's home title fraud. Law enforcement calls it one of the fastest growing crimes, and it can ruin you financially. This is why you need Home Title Lock. Title fraud happens when a criminal forges your signature on documents stating that you sold your home to them. They can take out loans against your home and leave you with payments. You'll spend a fortune in legal fees trying to prove that you didn't commit fraud. Home Title Lock puts a barrier around your home's title, and the instant they detect anyone trying to forge their way onto your home's title, they help shut it down. Visit HometitleLock.com, register your address to see if you could potentially be a victim. Enter code RADIO for 30 free days of protection. Welcome back. So today a mandate goes into effect for the state of New York, stating that businesses have to require vaccine cards for entry or require masks. Now, this is part of the state of emergency that was declared by the New York governor, Kathy Hochul, in response to the Omicron variant, which we've learned so far is basically, the way they make it sound, it's just a mild cold. These sorts of mandates, though, continue to be undermined by actual science, as well as emerging G variant treatments that aren't the vaccine. Our friend and constitutional attorney, Jonathan Emord, has a fantastic piece about all of this for townhall.com, and he joins us now. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here. This, of course, the undermining of these mandates is, for some reason, and I would hate to think this of lawmakers, but I really do feel like this is kind of bad news for them, especially as we have more of the antibody treatments, the monoclonal antibody treatments, and as we learn too that this variant may be probably one of maybe the best vaccinations or the best move towards that of it all, because if it's that mild and there's no hospitalizations, I mean, that may kind of undo the whole mandate totally. Tell us about this and where do you think that we're going to be with these mandates, especially if this new variant kind of takes over from Delta?
Well, the mandates really have major legal problems, but aside from that, as we know on the federal level, all five courts that have dealt with it have struck it down essentially by either imposing a temporary restraining order or permanent injunction against the mandates across the board. And the state mandates are likewise vulnerable. But what's happening is we're seeing an evolution of the virus, and you're pointing that out. The Omicron variant is far less virulent, as best we can tell, and that is a predictable course for a virulent virus like this to become more contagious but less virulent, because the virus can only survive, of course, if it has a host. So by killing its host, it becomes extinct. So now it's entering what's known as the endemic phase, and that's we see a full-blown endemic phase in Florida, and then we should be celebrating that instead of all these lockdowns and mask mandates and other forms of mandate. We ought to be looking at opening things up. And we ought to be shifting to a treatment model because of its less virulence. When it's less virulent, the treatments make much more sense because, as you're pointing out, you're going to get the benefit of immunity from the less virulent virus, which you want. And then you're going to also witness over time, people are not going to continuously get vaccinated. They're not going to, this idea that every 6 months we will be vaccinated and suffer the ill effects of vaccines for a number of people, it's going to induce fatigue. People are going to just, the levels of vaccination will continuously plummet over time. And the only solution long term that we're going to have to live with is a treatment model. And fortunately, we got a lot of them. Paxlovid from Pfizer is just coming out, 89% reduction in hospitalization and deaths from a treatment.
That's amazing. Those are great numbers. And you mentioned too, Jonathan, you mentioned Florida. I mean, they have super low hospitalization rate. And I was looking at some of this data has been reported by the New York Times, which isn't, I would say, maybe perhaps the bastion of conservative thought or the biggest Ron DeSantis fan. But they've even acknowledged that they've had, super low transmission, super low hospitalization rates. It really looks like, DeSantis has been leading the charge and managing this and getting it under control. But it's odd that that's not factored into the discussion whenever we talk about national shaming of not wearing masks or anything else. I mean, some of these areas that had the strictest protocol and some of the highest vaccination rates, they had some of the highest fatalities as well. And I just kind of want to get your thoughts on that as to how courts in some parts of the country can justify the continuing infringement on rights, yet knowing what the outcome has been without doing that.
Well, you're right. In the European Journal of Epidemiology this month, a Harvard study has been published that shows that in those areas of the world and in the counties that have the highest levels of vaccination, there's also the highest incidence of COVID infection. Now, you would expect the opposite, wouldn't you? But no, that's not what's happening. So it's not only that the vaccine has a poor performance, it's waning apparently to such a degree after people are vaccinated that the rates of infection in those states and in those counties and in those countries that have the highest levels of vaccination, they also have the highest level of infection. Now, when it comes to the states, it really depends upon how these mandates are imposed, but because they vary. When they come from public health departments, like in New York, they're arbitrary and capricious under administrative law because they're both over-inclusive and under-inclusive. They're not taking into account the fact that when you impose that on a business, it's ridiculous because the virus is ubiquitous. You catch it outside of the business. You catch it at another place, where people gather. And we know from our history that when people gather at home, that is frequently, when they're locked in their own homes, that is frequently the area of greatest proliferation of the virus. So we want people out. We want people in open air areas. The evidence from MIT shows that when external air is circulated internally and internal air is expelled from enclosed spaces, the level of transmission drops precipitously, emulating what it is in the outdoor environment. That's what we should be focusing on. We ought to be focusing on things that make sense. Ventilation, not telling people that they can't go to work, keeping them at home and causing more and more people to be forced to be unemployed is going to increase infection. And that has been the history around the world. The more they have lockdowns, the more they restrict people's liberties, the higher the rates of infection. And we ought to be doing something that makes sense instead of an authoritarian approach. It might make rulers happy, but it's causing misery. And no one's talking about the consequences of these lockdowns beyond COVID. I mean, we got all this mental illness. We got many kids committing suicide. These are consequences that are enormous. You would rather have, if you balance that, you'd rather have the modest risk that most people face of death from COVID than to have people increasingly resorting to suicide and having mental illness problems, resorting to the necessity of drugs for those illnesses. And, that's just part of it. A lot of people aren't being able to get elective operations. Some have essential operations that are being denied. All these things magnificently expand the burden on Americans with no good reason for it at all.
No, completely agree. Last question for you too. You're talking about the authoritarianism of it. I saw this morning, Wall Street Journal. Some hospitals have dropped their vaccine mandates to ease labor shortages, and of course, one of the downfalls that you were just talking about with the addictions and drug overdoses, et cetera. Of course, have been kids' immunity, their own immune system's taking a hit because they haven't been out and about like they normally would be, exposed to things all year long and able to develop that, a healthy immune response. And so now they say that shortages are compounded by burnout. They're trying to lure people back with high pay rates. So we went from first responders are the heroes to they're bad because they didn't get the jab. Now, oh my gosh, they're heroes. We need them back again. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that piece.
It's just insane. These people who are involved in public policy in these areas, in the cities, in the blue states, that are engaging in these draconian measures, they don't care about the consequences. They, in fact, delight in gaining greater control. And then when the obvious happens, all of us could have predicted there'd be crises and the absence of medical care, there would be problems associated with the absence of police, there would be problems associated with all sorts of restrictions on business, that people would suffer, there would be unemployment, people would starve. These things are obvious consequences, and yet there's no measure, none, in any of the blue states to take care of these people. You would think that these welfare state advocates would focus on caring for those they're injuring, but they don't. And the reason is that they're so obsessed with control, they couldn't care less about the consequences to people. The answer to all of this is to open things up. We have got to overcome this. We have to have the courage to do it, and we also have to have the common sense to recognize that treatment is the solution in the long run. The vaccines are not giving us the answers that we expected.
Yeah, true. No truer words spoken. Jonathan Emord, thank you so much. I appreciate your time with us. And Merry Christmas to you. Happy New Year. Thank you. So, folks, coming up, one of the great bastions of masculinity is under attack. I'm talking about James Bond, of course. So the woke mob, they've been going after 007 for a while, but now they have some new thoughts. That next. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company that serves premium coffee to people who love America. Veteran CEO and founder Evan Hafer spent over 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces and as a CIA contractor. Evan even modified his gun trucks while he was in Iraq so that he could grind coffee everywhere he went. Early morning overseas, Evan would cheers his coffee with his team leader before heading out on patrols. Great coffee has a way of grounding people no matter where we are. Through coffee, Evan was able to experience that perfect morning every morning, whether he was in Kabul, Seattle, or anywhere in between. So make someone's holiday better by giving the gift of Black Rifle Coffee. Visit blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV and check out the freshest coffee in America. Their team made your holiday shopping easy with personalized bundles, gift cards, and a whole lot more to make your holidays better. Visit blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV to get 20% off your coffee, your apparel, your gear, plus 20% off the first month of your coffee club. So as you probably know, Daniel Craig is stepping down as James Bond. Now, some would argue that he's been one of the best Bonds ever. It's kind of hard to beat Sean Connery, too. I love the James Bond series. I'm actually a huge fan of it, and not in spite of, but because it is a shrine to masculinity, and I also love spy movies. But it's James Bond, right? There's always like a big opening musical number, and he's like the guy that every woman wants to be with, and every man wants to be. And I think one of the reasons is because he's a tough dude. He's tough, he's in control, he's sophisticated, he knows how to order a drink, and he's worldly, and he also knows how to dress, and he doesn't look like just a disheveled pig. He also knows how to wire a pipe bomb. I'm just saying, because he's a spy, and he has all kinds of gadgets and gizmos that are awesome. He's very comfortable in a tux, but also on a bike. And he seems like marriage material, but he also has a job that takes him to far off exotic places, so he's kind of hard to pin down, but you could totally go on vacay in weird spots that are dangerous. He's chivalrous in the extreme, so he's a very, very powerful, very male archetype that the Marxist left hates. So of course, they got to destroy this bit of American iconography. It's American iconography, even though he's a British dude. I'm claiming it. just like they're trying to destroy Superman and Batman's sidekick Robin. I mean, Robin really was always kind of touch and go. But we can't have these toxic males running and flying around. Case in point, now the producer and owner of the Bond franchise, Barbara Broccoli, is saying this about the potential to reinvent James Bond in the future. Listen.
Do you still think that Bond will always be a man?
I do, because I don't think that we should be making films where women are playing men. I think we should be making more films about women and create female characters. So I think Bond will be a man.
Non-binary, perhaps, maybe one day?
Who knows? I mean, I think it's open, you know? I mean, we just have to find the right actor.
Gosh, my answer would have been like, non-binary, shut up your stupid mouth. You're stupid and your question's stupid, and so is your stupid podcast. I would have said that. No, I'm not, I just did. So not only did Broccoli say that she doesn't imagine, and I'm assuming that's how she pronounces her name. I just, it's not Bond, it's not simple. That she doesn't think that he would ever be a woman. She just says that Hollywood needs to write better female roles instead of making male characters, which I completely agree with, right? I mean, why is it that women go out and they can create their own characters? Women don't have to be the rec league version of a male character. Like, we can do our own thing. It's not my fault that Hollywood's not creative anymore, and that's why everybody, or maybe just me, is watching anime. But a non-binary Bond in the possible future, it's like, I don't know, a Jedi without the Force. James Bond's maleness, that's his secret sauce. It's why we watch him. Strong men are compelling to men and women. A non-binary 007 is stupid. It's stupid virtue signaling, and no one wants to watch some stupid asexual potato run around and fighting and getting their asses kicked by toxically masculine bad guys. It's a recipe to make the bad guys look much more appealing, which maybe, and they're all Marxists anyway, maybe that's the whole point. The non-binary character Pat from Saturday Night Live isn't an interesting secret agent. Nobody wants to watch a James Bond movie where everyone has where he's got the Karen haircut that's a mullet, which could also be a chick or dude haircut. You just don't know. Like, the biggest mystery in the film would be whether or not he's a dude or a chick. Nobody wants that. I'm tired of the deconstruction of our heroes. It's all a part of this Maoist Marxist, this Maoist left push to deconstruct everything that Western society holds dear. Mao knew this. He knew that the key to changing a society was to demolish all of its systems and symbols like maleness. James Bond may be a fictional character, but he's an avatar for Western ideas about dudes. And certainly no man could live up to all the things Bond is. And still, though, he's hyperbolically everything that we would like a man to be: tough, smart, aggressive, good, knows how to order a drink, dresses properly, is a total gentleman, opens the door for the lady. I mean, for the love. And that's a problem for the Marxist Maoist left, because Bond reinforces the reality of sexes and also like positions and genders, while also reinforcing the importance of male energy in society. God bless that. Male aggression under control. There's chivalry. Go back and look at conversations and definitions of chivalry, right? You can be an ass kicker out on the battlefield, but you're a gentleman when you're in the dining hall. That's chivalry. And that's what's needed to keep society and evil in check. It's attractive. Bond reminds us of this. And he also reminds us that there are two sexes, two only, bite me, and they're very different. And there's a very irresistible attraction between them, as the Bond girls demonstrate in every movie. And the names, I cannot live without the names. A woman cannot be Bond any more than James Bond can be Queen of England. A non-binary person cannot be Bond, because non-binary is a fictional, imaginary unicorn thing. Get mad and fight me. I don't care. I got middle fingers for enough people. And by the way, this kind of energy is exactly what makes James Bond 007. And it's what makes us watch. And as a chick, I'm tired of people assassinating icons to masculinity. A non-binary Bond is an assassination of James Bond. And it would be the assassination that the franchise would never recover from. So no. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.